My daughter-in-law, Maya, says she gave me the envelope by mistake. An accident. A simple mix-up during a chaotic Tuesday morning. But I've learned that the most devastating truths in a family rarely announce themselves. They don't arrive with a thunderclap, they arrive in a plain manila envelope. Dropped off with a tired smile. Feeling just a little too heavy in your hands. And by the time you realize what you're holding, it's already too late. The quiet has already been broken. If you've ever had a gut feeling that something was wrong, even when everyone insisted things were fine, then you understand the kind of chill that went down my spine that morning. Stick with me, because what I found inside that envelope would unravel a secret my son was willing to destroy himself to protect. The silence in my house has a sound. It's the low, steady hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. A sound I've known for 30 years. It's the gentle tick of the grandfather clock my late husband, Frank, bought at an antique fair in Wisconsin. Tuesday mornings are the loudest. Ironically, that's when the garbage trucks rumble down our suburban Chicago street, their hydraulic arms groaning as they lift the bins. For me, it's a rhythm, a weekly pulse that proves the world is still moving. I was in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already clean, when I saw Maya's 10-year-old sedan pull into my driveway. The car had a new dent on the passenger side door I hadn't seen before. Through the window, I watched her cut the engine, but she didn't get out right away. Her shoulders were slumped, and she just stared out at the bare oak tree in my front yard. Its branches like dark veins against the flat, gray November sky. She finally pushed the door open, pulling her coat tight against a wind that had a real bite to it. In her hand was a large manila envelope, the kind you get from an office supply store. "Hey, Carol," she said as I opened the door. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. There were faint, purple smudges beneath them, the kind that no amount of concealer can hide. "Maya, honey, you didn't have to drive all the way over. You could have just sent it with David this evening," I said, ushering her into the warmth of the house. The scent of coffee and cinnamon from my breakfast still lingered in the air. "Oh, it was no big deal. I was heading to the library anyway. And I know you wanted the stencils for the Thanksgiving decorations," she said, handing me the envelope. It was surprisingly heavy, thicker than I expected for a few plastic stencils. "Besides," she added with a weak laugh, "you know how David's memory is. He'd probably leave it in his car for a week." I took the envelope, my fingers brushing against hers. Her skin was ice cold. "You look exhausted," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "A nurse's habit, I guess. You learn to read people's vitals just by looking at them. Are you sleeping all right?" "Just busy." She waved a dismissive hand. But her eyes darted away, toward the photos on my mantelpiece. There was one of David in his high school football uniform, grinning with a missing tooth. Another of Frank and me on our wedding day. The holidays. The kids. David's been so swamped with coaching, you know how it is. I did know, or at least, I thought I did. David was a history teacher and the head coach for the varsity football team. A good man, my son, a man who worked too hard, just like his father. "Well, let me make you a fresh cup of coffee before you go," I offered, already turning toward the kitchen. It was a simple offer, but underneath, it was something more. "Stay a while, talk to me, let me help carry whatever is making your shoulders slump like that." "I can't, Carol, I'm already running late." The words were rushed. She was already backing toward the door, pulling the keys from her pocket. "Thanks so much for watching Leo last weekend, by the way. He had a blast. He's never a bother. You know I love having my grandson over. I'll call you later this week to figure out the Thanksgiving menu," she said, halfway out the door. "Talk soon." And just like that, she was gone. The roar of her car's engine faded, and the silence rushed back in, broken only by the ticking clock. I stood in the hallway, holding the heavy envelope. It felt important, official, not at all like craft supplies. I ran my thumb over the flap. It wasn't sealed, it was just tucked in, as if someone had closed it in a hurry, their mind a million miles away. My brow furrowed. That wasn't like Maya. She was usually so organized, so meticulous. I placed it on the kitchen table, telling myself I'd open it later. It was probably nothing, just stencils, but a tiny, unsettling feeling began to seed itself in my gut. It was the same feeling I used to get on the night shift. Right before a patient's monitor would start to beep frantically. The quiet before the storm. I told myself I was being ridiculous. A retired woman with too much time on her hands. Inventing drama where there was none. I left the envelope on the polished surface of my kitchen table and went to the living room to dust the mantelpiece. A task I'd already done that morning. I ran the cloth over the silver frames. My own movements reflected in the glass. There was Frank, his arm around me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. There was David, age 7, holding up a string of fish. So proud of his catch. A normal family, a happy life. But the envelope seemed to have a gravitational pull. From the living room, I could feel its presence in the kitchen. A silent, rectangular accusation. It was the weight of it. The way it sat there. Dense and unmoving. Craft stencils were light, flimsy things. This was something else. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to grow louder. Each second a small tap on my growing anxiety. Oh, for heaven's sake, Carol, I muttered to myself. The sound of my own voice startling in the quiet. Just open the thing and put your mind at ease. Back in the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water. My hand not quite steady. I dried my hands on a dish towel and finally, I sat down and pulled the envelope towards me. I slid my finger under the unsealed flap and tipped the contents onto the table. There were no stencils. Instead, a thick stack of pristine white papers slid out, held together by a large black binder clip. The top sheet was an invoice, printed on heavy, professional-looking letterhead. My eyes scanned the top of the page, searching for a familiar name, a logical explanation, and then I found one. Patient, David Miller. My son. My heart gave a painful lurch. The invoice was from a clinic I'd never heard of, North Shore Neurology Associates. Below his name was a list of charges. A column of numbers that made my breath catch. MRI scan, brain and cervical spine. Lumbar puncture. Evoked potential studies. This wasn't a routine checkup. This was a full-scale diagnostic investigation. My nursing career was 20 years in the past. But you never forget the language of fear. My hands started to tremble as I shuffled through the next pages. They were lab reports, filled with medical jargon and abbreviations. I forced my eyes to focus. The old professional part of my brain taking over. Trying to be clinical, detached. I saw phrases circled in red ink. Presence of oligoclonal bands in CSF. Multiple T2 hyperintense lesions consistent with demyelination. It was like reading a foreign language that I tragically understood. These weren't just words, they were signposts pointing to something terrible. Something chronic. No, I whispered, shaking my head. There's a mistake. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe this was for a life insurance application? They do extensive tests for that. Maybe David was helping a friend. A colleague at the school? Maybe he was just being overly cautious about some headaches. Yes, that was it. He'd mentioned headaches a few months ago. I kept sorting through the papers, desperate to find the one document that would make it all make sense. The one that would say, all tests negative, patient is in perfect health. But I never found it. What I found instead was at the very bottom of the stack. It was a glossy, tri-fold pamphlet. The cover was deceptively cheerful, featuring a photo of a smiling, vibrant couple hiking on a sunny mountaintop. They looked healthy. They looked happy, but the title, printed in a calm, serene blue font, stole the air from my lungs. Living with Multiple Sclerosis, a guide for patients and families. I picked it up. The paper felt cold, clinical, my eyes blurred, and for a moment, I couldn't read the words inside. The ticking of the clock faded away, replaced by a dull roaring in my ears. I opened the pamphlet, and my gaze landed on the first paragraph of the introduction. Multiple sclerosis, MS, is a chronic, often unpredictable disease of the central nervous system. While not fatal, it is a lifelong condition. Lifelong condition. The pamphlet slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor. The smiling couple on the cover landed face up, mocking me with their easy happiness. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly seemed deafening. A relentless, mechanical noise in a world that had just stopped making sense. My son, my strong, healthy son, who could throw a football 50 yards and carry his own son on his shoulders without breaking a sweat. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But the papers were still there on my table. And the name on every single one of them was his. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the cheerful pamphlet lying on my linoleum floor. The world had narrowed to that single, glossy piece of paper and the hum of the refrigerator. The first coherent thought that broke through the roaring in my ears was a stubborn, desperate flicker of logic. Mistake. Labs make mistakes. Samples get switched. Miller is one of the most common names in the country. There could be a dozen David Millers in the Chicago area alone. Maya must have picked up the wrong paperwork for a friend. Or a patron at the library. Any explanation was better than the one staring me in the face. My body moved before my mind did. I bent down, my knees cracking in protest, and picked up the pamphlet. My hands were on autopilot, the muscle memory of 1,000 nursing shifts taking over. I smoothed the creases, stacked the lab reports and the invoice into a neat pile, and tapped them against the tabletop until the edges were perfectly aligned. Restoring order. If I could make the papers neat, maybe I could make this whole thing go away. I slid the entire stack back into the manila envelope and pushed it to the center of the table. As if containing the evidence would contain the truth itself. But my mind wouldn't quiet. It was the nurse in me. The part that Frank used to say could never be turned off. It was a curse sometimes. That analytical part of my brain. It couldn't accept ambiguity. It needed data. It needed facts. While my heart was screaming in denial, my brain was already dissecting the information I'd seen. Oligoclonal bands, lesions on MRI. Those weren't casual findings. They were the cornerstones of a serious neurological diagnosis. I walked into the small spare bedroom I'd converted into a home office years ago. The old desktop computer took a full minute to groan to life. Its fan whirring loudly in the silence. The screen cast a cold, blue light on my face. My fingers, stiff with a touch of arthritis, felt clumsy on the keyboard. I typed multiple sclerosis symptoms into the search bar. And then I fell down the rabbit hole. I spent the next 2 hours scrolling through a landscape of fear. I avoided the flimsy blogs and chat rooms, heading straight for the sources I trusted: Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, the National MS Society. The nurse in me was searching for a loophole. A piece of information that would disprove the papers on my kitchen table. But the mother in me was sinking deeper and deeper into a cold ocean of dread. Fatigue, bone deep and relentless. I thought of David last month. Asleep on my couch at 7 p.m., not waking even when his son, Leo, climbed on top of him. Maya had said he was just worn out from the football season. Numbness or weakness in one or more limbs. I flashed back to Easter dinner. David had been carrying the roast turkey to the table when the platter suddenly slipped from his grasp. Crashing onto the floor, he'd laughed it off, blaming the hot pads, his face flushed with embarrassment. Vision problems, often with pain during eye movement. He'd just gotten a new, stronger prescription for his glasses 2 months ago, complaining that the fluorescent lights at the high school were giving him terrible headaches. Each symptom was a small, sharp piece of glass. And together they were forming a mosaic of a reality I didn't want to see. This wasn't a mistake. These weren't coincidences. This was my son's life. Laid out in clinical, terrifying detail on a computer screen. But why? The question pounded in my head. Louder than any symptom. Why would they hide this from me? David and I had always been close. He called me every Sunday night. He still came over to help me with the storm windows every fall. Secrets weren't a part of our relationship. My eyes fell on the family calendar icon still bookmarked on my browser. Maya had set up a shared digital calendar years ago so I could help with babysitting Leo. They probably forgot I still had access. My mouse hovered over it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt like a spy in my own family. A trespasser. But I had to know. I clicked. The calendar opened up. A grid of their busy lives. Leo's soccer practice, Maya's library shifts, parent-teacher conferences. It all looked so normal. I started scrolling back, my eyes scanning the past few months, cross-referencing the dates on the clinic invoice. There, September 14th. The invoice listed an MRI for that day. David had told me it was a mandatory teacher-in-service day at the school. The whole campus was closed. But on the family calendar, There was a simple, cryptic entry at 9 a.m., DMAPPT. I scrolled further. October 3rd Road. The date of the lumbar puncture. David had said he was taking a personal day to catch up on grading papers. The calendar showed another entry, DM follow-up. There were more, a dozen of them over 3 months. All masked as something else. All labeled with those same discrete initials. Each entry was another brick in the wall they had built between us. They hadn't just kept a secret, they had actively constructed a series of lies to keep me out. I scrolled forward to the current week. And then I saw it. An appointment for tomorrow afternoon. Wednesday, 2 p.m. DMAPPT. Treatment plan. Treatment plan. The words confirmed everything. This wasn't a diagnostic phase anymore. This was the beginning of a fight. A fight my son and his wife had decided I wasn't allowed to be a part of. The cold dread that had been pooling in my stomach now hardened into something else. A sharp, painful resolve. My denial was gone, shattered by the undeniable proof on the screen. All that was left was one heartbreaking question. Why? I stared at the words on the screen, treatment plan, until they blurred. My first impulse was to grab my car keys, drive to that clinic, and wait in the parking lot for them. To confront them, to demand an explanation. The anger was there, a hot, sharp thing coiling in my chest. It would have been the easy path. The path of righteous indignation. But underneath the anger was a deep, aching hurt, a hurt so profound it stole my breath. This wasn't a business betrayal, this was my son. My David. There had to be a reason. A logic to this madness that I just couldn't see yet. A direct confrontation would only make him retreat further behind the wall of lies he and Maya had so carefully built. I needed to understand why before I could do anything else. I closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen. My movements slow and deliberate. I picked up the old landline phone from its cradle on the wall. The coiled cord cool and familiar in my hand. I knew his schedule. He'd be home from football practice by now. Probably helping Maya with dinner while Leo chattered about his day. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to see if I could hear the lie in it. I rehearsed the opening in my head. A casual, normal conversation. No accusations. No panic. Just a mother calling her son on a Tuesday afternoon. I took a deep, steadying breath and dialed. He picked up on the third ring. Hey, Mom, what's up? His voice was a bomb. So familiar and warm it almost made me forget the cold. Clinical papers in the other room. In the background, I could hear the sounds of his life, the clang of a pot. Leo laughing, the TV murmuring, a picture of normal domestic chaos. Oh, nothing much, honey, just wanted to see how your day was, I said, forcing a lightness into my tone that felt like a betrayal to the rock sitting in my stomach. It was a day, he said with a short laugh. We're running drills for the playoffs. The kids are excited. I'm exhausted. The usual. Don't overdo it, David. You've been sounding tired lately. The words were out before I could stop them. A gentle probe. A test. There was a pause. Just a fraction of a second too long. I'm fine, Mom. It's the end of the season. That's all. Comes with the territory. His voice was a little tighter now. Defensive. I decided to change tactics. I launched into the story I'd concocted. The lie I'd built to smoke out his. You know, I was on the phone earlier with Susan, my old friend from the hospital. We were catching up, and she was telling me the most worrying thing about her son. Michael, he's about your age. Oh yeah? David said, his voice laced with the polite disinterest of someone waiting for a story to end. Yes, she said he's been incredibly tired lately. And he's been having some trouble with his vision. Even some numbness in his hands. If you can believe it. They've been going to all sorts of specialists. I let the sentence hang in the air. A piece of bait. I was describing the classic MS symptoms I had just read about. Holding my breath. Listening for any flicker of recognition. Any crack in his composure. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Suffocating. I could hear him breathing. I pictured his face. The way his jaw would tighten when he was trying to hide something. Wow, he finally said, the word coming out flat and empty. That's really tough. I hope he's okay. It was a textbook response. The kind of thing you say to a stranger. There was no emotion, no curiosity, just a hollow echo. He tried to pivot. Hey, Speaking of kids, you won't believe what Leo did at practice today. He scored a goal from. I cut him off. Something I rarely did. She said the doctors are still running tests. But they're worried it might be something long-term. Something he'll have to manage for the rest of his life. I pushed a little harder. My heart pounding. I was giving him an opening. A chance to connect. To confide. See, David? Other people go through this. You aren't alone. Mom. His voice was sharp now. All pretense of casualness was gone. It was the tone he used on the football field when a player missed a catch. Why are you telling me this? It's a sad story, but I've got a lot on my plate right now. I just worry about you. That's all, I said, my voice softer now, pleading. You work so hard. You have to take care of your health. I am taking care of my health. I'm fine, he snapped. The lie was no longer hidden. It was stark and clear between us. Look, Mom, I've really got to go. Maya needs help with dinner and Leo is drawing on the walls with a crayon. An excuse. A quick exit. David, wait. I'll call you Sunday, okay? Same time. Love you. Bye. The line went dead. I stood there in my silent kitchen. The dial tone buzzing in my ear like an angry insect. The sound of a door being slammed shut. He didn't confess. He didn't have to. Every defensive word, every forced pause, every desperate attempt to change the subject was a confession in itself. He was hiding it. He knew that I knew something was wrong. And he had deliberately, forcefully, shut me out. The anger was gone now. Washed away by a cold, devastating tide of grief. This wasn't just a secret. This was a choice. And my son had chosen to face this alone. I stared at the words on the screen, treatment plan, until they blurred. My first impulse was to grab my car keys, drive to that clinic, and wait in the parking lot for them. To confront them, to demand an explanation. The anger was there, a hot, sharp thing coiling in my chest. It would have been the easy path, the path of righteous indignation. But underneath the anger was a deep, aching hurt, a hurt so profound it stole my breath. This wasn't a business betrayal, this was my son. My David. There had to be a reason. A logic to this madness that I just couldn't see yet. A direct confrontation would only make him retreat further behind the wall of lies he and Maya had so carefully built. I needed to understand why before I could do anything else. I closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen. My movements slow and deliberate. I picked up the old landline phone from its cradle on the wall. The coiled cord cool and familiar in my hand. I knew his schedule. He'd be home from football practice by now. Probably helping Maya with dinner while Leo chattered about his day. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to see if I could hear the lie in it. I rehearsed the opening in my head. A casual, normal conversation. No accusations. No panic. Just a mother calling her son on a Tuesday afternoon. I took a deep, steadying breath and dialed. He picked up on the third ring. Hey, Mom, what's up? His voice was a bomb. So familiar and warm it almost made me forget the cold. Clinical papers in the other room. In the background, I could hear the sounds of his life, the clang of a pot. Leo laughing, the TV murmuring, a picture of normal domestic chaos. Oh, nothing much, honey, just wanted to see how your day was, I said, forcing a lightness into my tone that felt like a betrayal to the rock sitting in my stomach. It was a day, he said with a short laugh. We're running drills for the playoffs. The kids are excited. I'm exhausted. The usual. Don't overdo it, David. You've been sounding tired lately. The words were out before I could stop them. A gentle probe. A test. There was a pause. Just a fraction of a second too long. I'm fine, Mom. It's the end of the season. That's all. Comes with the territory. His voice was a little tighter now. Defensive. I decided to change tactics. I launched into the story I'd concocted. The lie I'd built to smoke out his. You know, I was on the phone earlier with Susan, my old friend from the hospital. We were catching up, and she was telling me the most worrying thing about her son. Michael, he's about your age. Oh yeah? David said, his voice laced with the polite disinterest of someone waiting for a story to end. Yes, she said he's been incredibly tired lately. And he's been having some trouble with his vision. Even some numbness in his hands. If you can believe it. They've been going to all sorts of specialists. I let the sentence hang in the air. A piece of bait. I was describing the classic MS symptoms I had just read about. Holding my breath, listening for any flicker of recognition, any crack in his composure. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, suffocating. I could hear him breathing. I pictured his face, the way his jaw would tighten when he was trying to hide something. "Wow," he finally said, the word coming out flat and empty. That's really tough. I hope he's okay." It was a textbook response. The kind of thing you say to a stranger. There was no emotion, no curiosity, just a hollow echo. He tried to pivot. "Hey, speaking of kids, you won't believe what Leo did at practice today. He scored a goal from." I cut him off. "Something I rarely did. She said the doctors are still running tests. But they're worried it might be something long-term. Something he'll have to manage for the rest of his life." I pushed a little harder. My heart pounding. I was giving him an opening. A chance to connect. To confide. "See, David? Other people go through this. You aren't alone. Mom." His voice was sharp now. All pretense of casualness was gone. It was the tone he used on the football field when a player missed a catch. "Why are you telling me this? It's a sad story, but I've got a lot on my plate right now. I just worry about you. That's all," I said, my voice softer now, pleading. "You work so hard. You have to take care of your health." "I am taking care of my health. I'm fine," he snapped. The lie was no longer hidden. It was stark and clear between us. "Look, Mom, I've really got to go. Maya needs help with dinner and Leo is drawing on the walls with a crayon." An excuse. A quick exit. "David, wait. I'll call you Sunday, okay? Same time. Love you. Bye." The line went dead. I stood there in my silent kitchen. The dial tone buzzing in my ear like an angry insect. The sound of a door being slammed shut. He didn't confess. He didn't have to. Every defensive word, every forced pause, every desperate attempt to change the subject was a confession in itself. He was hiding it. He knew that I knew something was wrong. And he had deliberately, forcefully, shut me out. The anger was gone now. Washed away by a cold, devastating tide of grief. This wasn't just a secret. This was a choice. And my son had chosen to face this alone. The dial tone buzzed in my ear for a full minute before I had the strength to place the receiver back in its cradle. The click it made echoed in the profound silence of the house. The wall he had built was cold and absolute. I felt like I had reached for my son and found a stranger. My feet carried me from the kitchen into the living room. A slow, aimless drift. I ran my hand along the back of Frank's old armchair. The worn leather smoothed beneath my fingers. My eyes landed on the mantelpiece. Our curated collection of memories frozen in silver frames. I reached for the largest one, a photo of Frank and me. Taken at a 4th of July barbecue about 15 years ago. He was laughing, holding a spatula like a scepter. A smear of barbecue sauce on his cheek. He looked strong, indestructible. The man who could build a deck in a single weekend and carry me across the threshold just to make me laugh. I sank into his armchair, clutching the photo to my chest, staring at his smiling face. The happy memory began to fray at the edges, dissolving into another, harder one. The ticking of the clock faded, replaced by the sound of a fork clattering against a ceramic plate. Flashback 15 years earlier. The sound came from the dining room. Frank was sitting at the table, a plate of spaghetti in front of him. He was staring at his hand, a tremor running through his fingers that made the fork dance. A younger David, maybe 16, stood in the doorway of the kitchen, frozen, watching his father. "Damn thing," Frank muttered, trying to steady his hand against the table. "Just won't listen." He was a carpenter, a man who built things with those hands, who could measure twice and cut once with absolute certainty. Now, they were betraying him. "Dad, do you want some help?" David asked, his teenage voice cracking slightly. "I don't need help eating my own dinner." "Son," Frank snapped, his frustration a raw, open wound. He wasn't angry at David. He was angry at the disease that was slowly, methodically, stealing pieces of him. He finally managed to spear a meatball. But halfway to his mouth, his hand jerked, sending it tumbling back onto the plate with a soft splat of marinara sauce. He threw the fork down. The clatter was like a gunshot in the tense silence. "I'm not hungry," he said, pushing his chair back and walking stiffly out of the room. David and I were left staring at his uneaten meal. The silence thick with everything we weren't allowed to say. Flashback 10 years earlier. The house smelled of antiseptic and medicated lotion. I was sitting on the edge of our bed, helping Frank with the tiny buttons on his shirt. He was home from the hospital after another fall. A long, purple bruise snaked up his forearm. He was thinner now, the indestructible frame of the man in the photograph whittled down by the relentless progression of his illness. "I can do it, Carol," he insisted, his voice a strained whisper. But his fingers were clumsy, refusing to obey. "I know you can," I said, my voice adopting the cheerful, professional tone I used with my most difficult patients. "Just let me get this top one for you." I finished the buttons, my movements quick and efficient. I tried not to let him see the effort it took, the toll it was taking on me. The sleepless nights listening to his labored breathing, the endless calendar of doctor's appointments, the sheer physical and emotional weight of being a caregiver. David was home from college for the weekend. He had been quiet, almost invisible, spending most of his time in his old bedroom with the door closed. He found excuses to be out of the house, visiting friends, going to the library. He wasn't being cruel, he was terrified. He couldn't stand to see his hero fading away. That evening, I found him in the kitchen, scrubbing a pan with a ferocity that was almost violent. His shoulders were rigid. "Your father asked about you," I said softly. "I'll go see him in a bit," he said, his eyes fixed on the pan. "I just need to finish this." He was hiding from the sounds, the smells, the reality of the sick room down the hall, hiding from the ghost of his own future. Flashback 7 years earlier. It was near the end. Frank was bedridden, the world having shrunk to the four walls of our bedroom. David, now a young man just out of grad school, was helping me change his father's sheets. The role reversal was a silent, crushing weight between us. This strong young man, lifting the frail body of the father who had once lifted him onto his shoulders. Later, I was in the bathroom with Frank. David stood outside the door, his face pale. "I need you to help me get him into the shower chair," I said, my voice strained with the effort. David nodded, his jaw tight, and came into the room. It was a moment of profound, heartbreaking intimacy, the stripping away of all dignity, leaving only love and necessity. Frank was barely conscious, but as David gently lifted him, his eyes flickered open and focused on his son's face. His voice was a dry, rasping sound, barely audible. "David, I'm here, Dad. Don't let your mother," he struggled for the words. "Don't be a burden. Promise me." David's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded, unable to speak. "I promise, Dad," he whispered. "I promise." Present day. The memory dissolved, and I was back in the living room, in Frank's armchair. Tears were streaming down my face, dripping onto the glass of the photo frame. The house was silent again, the ticking clock the only sound. I finally understood. It wasn't anger that made David lie. It wasn't a lack of trust. It was a promise made in a moment of unbearable grief to a dying father. He wasn't shutting me out to hurt me. He was trying to protect me. He was trying to spare me from having to walk that road again. The long, brutal road of being a caregiver to a man you love as he disappears before your eyes. In his mind, he was being noble. He was saving me, but his misguided, loving, heartbreaking promise was going to destroy him. And the hurt in my chest shifted, transformed by a fierce, primal wave of maternal instinct. I would not lose another man I loved to a neurological disease while I stood by and watched. Not this time. Understanding why David was hiding his illness didn't make the secret any smaller. If anything, it made it heavier. His love for me, twisted by the trauma of his father's death, had become a cage. He was suffering alone to spare me a pain I was already strong enough to have survived once. It was a sacrifice I would not allow him to make. The next morning, I woke with a new, unsettling clarity. The question was no longer if I should intervene, but how. I couldn't force my way in. I couldn't break down his door with accusations and tears. I had to walk through it. And to do that, I needed something more than lab reports and a hunch. I needed the final, physical proof that would give me the right to shatter the promise he made to his father. I spent the morning baking oatmeal raisin cookies, David's favorite since he was a boy. The familiar rhythm of measuring flour and sugar was a comfort. A piece of normal life in a world that felt anything but. It was a mother's perfect excuse. A Trojan horse made of butter and love. I checked the shared family calendar one last time. Leo had a soccer game from 10 to noon. They would be out of the house. Driving to their neighborhood, the platters of warm cookies wrapped in foil on the passenger seat felt like a lie. Their street was quiet, the houses all neat copies of each other. Their lawns tidy. I parked in front of their small brick ranch. The one they'd been so proud to buy 5 years ago. I walked up the driveway. My footsteps the only sound. And hesitated at the front door. In my hand was the spare key they'd given me for emergencies. A symbol of trust. Using it now, like this, felt like a violation, a deep trespass into the life they had so fiercely guarded from me. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment. "I'm sorry, David," I whispered to the empty air, and slid the key into the lock. The house was still and silent. A half-empty mug of coffee sat on the counter next to a stack of mail. Leo's dinosaur backpack was slumped by the door. It smelled like them, a mix of cinnamon from Maya's candles and the faint, clean scent of laundry detergent. I placed the cookies on the kitchen island with a note. "Thinking of you, love, Mom," the evidence of my cover story. Then, my mission began. I moved through the house like a ghost. My soft-soled shoes making no sound on the hardwood floors. My heart hammered against my ribs. Each beat a guilty thump. I started in the guest bathroom. My hands shaking as I opened the medicine cabinet. Nothing, just aspirin, bandages, and a bottle of expired cough syrup. Next, I went to their master bedroom. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled, a sign of a morning rush. I checked David's nightstand, a biography of Abraham Lincoln, a glass of water, a charging phone, nothing. I checked Maya's, a romance novel, hand cream, a bottle of melatonin. A wave of doubt washed over me. What if I'm wrong? What if I've invented this whole nightmare? But the nurse's instinct, that quiet, persistent voice, pushed me onward. It drew me to the closet. I slid the door open. David's clothes were on the right, hung in neat, orderly rows, t-shirts folded in perfect squares on the shelves above. It smelled of his aftershave, a scent so familiar it made my throat ache. I ran my hands over the shelves, behind the stacks of sweaters, under a pile of old baseball caps. Nothing. My eyes scanned the top shelf, the place for things you don't need every day. A box of old photo albums, a winter blanket still in its plastic bag, and tucked all the way in the back, almost completely hidden, was a plain brown shoebox, a brand of running shoes he hadn't worn in years. My breath caught. It was too deliberate, too hidden. I pulled over the small vanity chair from Maya's side of the room, my legs feeling unsteady as I climbed onto it. I reached for the box, my fingers brushing against the dusty cardboard. It was light, but not empty. I got down and sat on the edge of their bed, the box in my lap. For a moment, I just stared at it, the last door I wasn't sure I wanted to open. With a trembling hand, I lifted the lid. It wasn't shoes. Inside, nestled in white tissue paper, was the stark, clinical reality of a managed disease. There were 3 prescription bottles, the labels clear and undeniable. Patient, David Miller. Medication, interferon beta 1A. Below it, the words, inject 44 mcg 3 times weekly. Next to the bottles were sealed packages of syringes, a box of alcohol swabs, and a small, leather-bound notebook. I opened the notebook. The pages were filled with David's neat, concise handwriting. It was a log, dates, times, injection sites, 11 halves left thigh, mild irritation, 11/5 right arm, fatigue the next day, 11/7 left abdomen, bruising. This was the proof, not a theory, not a report, but the physical, tangible evidence of his secret battle. A battle he'd been fighting in silence, in the privacy of this closet. Week after week, the strength went out of my limbs. I didn't scream or sob. A deeper, quieter kind of devastation took hold. I slid off the bed and sank to the floor, leaning my back against the frame, the open shoebox in my lap. I was surrounded by the scent of his clothes, the life he lived, while holding the truth he was hiding. The cookies sat on the counter in the kitchen, a pathetic offering of a love he felt he couldn't accept. And in the silent, sunlit bedroom, I finally let myself break. The 2 weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were the longest of my life. I lived with the secret. A heavy stone in my gut. I'd see David and Maya at Leo's soccer games or when they'd drop by for a quick visit. And I'd have to pretend. I'd have to smile and ask about their day. All the while seeing the exhaustion behind Maya's eyes and the subtle limp in David's walk when he thought no one was watching. The shoebox of medication sat in my closet. A constant, silent reminder. I watched them carry this impossible burden. And my anger softened into a deep, ferocious ache. They were wrong to shut me out. But they had done it out of love. And now I had to find a way to answer with a love that was stronger than their fear. I decided it had to be on Thanksgiving. The one day a year dedicated to family, gratitude, and truth. The one day we couldn't run from each other. They arrived at noon, the air crisp with the promise of snow. We fell into the familiar choreography of the holiday. David brought in the pies Maya had baked. His movements a little stiff. Maya immediately started helping me in the kitchen. Her chatter a little too bright. Leo ran through the house. His happy shouts a stark contrast to the quiet tension humming just beneath the surface. We were all performing our roles in a play about a happy, normal family. We sat down to eat at 2 o'clock. The table looked like a magazine cover. The good china Frank and I had received as a wedding gift. The silver polished to a gleam. And in the center, a golden brown turkey, perfectly roasted. The rich smell of stuffing and gravy filled the house. It was a picture of everything I had been so afraid to lose. Everything looks amazing, Mom, David said, carving the turkey with practiced hands. But he was only going through the motions. It really does, Carol, Maya added, passing the mashed potatoes. You always outdo yourself. The conversation was a minefield of safe topics. We talked about the brutal season the Chicago Bears were having. We talked about the first dusting of snow that was predicted for that evening. We praised Maya's pumpkin pie. David pushed the food around on his plate, barely eating, while Maya refilled her wine glass twice before we'd even finished the main course. I watched them, my heart aching with the weight of what I was about to do. Finally, after the plates were cleared of everything but scattered crumbs, Maya stood up. Well, I should probably start on this mountain of dishes. Wait, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room, stopping her in her tracks. David looked up from his plate, his fork halfway to his mouth. Maya froze, her hand hovering over the empty serving platter. Even Leo fell silent, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Slowly, I reached into the pocket of the apron I was wearing. My hand closed around the glossy, folded pamphlet. It felt both flimsy and impossibly heavy. I pulled it out and, with a steady hand, I placed it in the center of the table, right next to the gravy boat and the half-empty basket of dinner rolls. The cheerful blue title was facing up, Living with Multiple Sclerosis. Silence. A profound, suffocating silence that swallowed every other sound in the room. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to have stopped. David stared at the pamphlet as if it were a venomous snake. The color drained from his face, leaving a sickly, gray pallor. Maya's eyes were wide, fixed on my face, a look of pure, unadulterated panic in them. She sank back into her chair, her whole body seeming to deflate. It was Leo who spoke first, his small voice piping up into the void. What's that, Grandma? Is that for a school project? David flinched, closing his eyes as if he'd been struck. He finally looked at me, his gaze a shattered mirror of guilt, fear, and exhaustion. I found it, I said softly, answering Leo but speaking to David. In the shoebox, in your closet, along with the medication logs. That was it. The dam broke. A choked sob escaped David's lips. A sound of such profound relief and despair it broke my heart. He dropped his fork, which clattered loudly against his plate, and buried his face in his hands. His broad shoulders, the same shoulders that carried the weight of his football team, shook with silent, racking sobs. Maya started to cry, too, her tears silent and steady as they streamed down her cheeks. Carol, we were going to tell you, she whispered, her voice cracking. We didn't know how. Why? The single word was all I could manage. It was the question that had haunted me for weeks. David, why wouldn't you tell me? He finally lifted his head. his eyes red-rimmed and raw with a pain that had clearly been festering for months. "Because of Dad," he said, his voice hoarse. "I saw what it did to you. To all of us. I watched him disappear. Mom, I promised him I would never be a burden to you. I wouldn't make you go through that again." "A burden?" I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "David, loving you has never been a burden. It's the greatest privilege of my life." "I was trying to protect you," he insisted, his voice rising with desperation. "And I was trying to protect him," Maya added, reaching a trembling hand across the table towards me. "He was so scared, and the doctor said stress makes it worse. I thought if we could just handle it ourselves. If we could keep things normal for you, it would be better for everyone." I looked at their faces. At these two people I loved more than anything, who had tried to navigate an impossible situation with a broken compass. And the last vestiges of my anger washed away, replaced by a wave of pure, heartbreaking love. "The hardest part of my life was not watching your father die," I said, my own tears finally falling. "The hardest part was the last few weeks. Feeling like I was losing my son. Too, believing you didn't trust me. Did you think my love was so fragile that this would break me?" David shook his head, unable to speak, fresh tears tracking down his face. I stood up, walked around the table, and pulled my son's head to my shoulder, wrapping my arms around him as I had when he was a little boy who'd fallen off his bike. He leaned into me, his body trembling. Maya came over and put her arms around both of us. The three of us stood there, clinging to each other in the ruins of our Thanksgiving dinner, the secrets and lies finally washed away by a flood of painful, healing truth. The battle with his illness was just beginning, but the war we had been fighting against each other was finally over. The aftermath of our Thanksgiving confession was quiet and messy. We didn't magically solve everything. We just sat there for a long time at the ruined dinner table. The cold turkey and uneaten pie a testament to our broken performance. And we talked. For the first time in months. We really talked. David spoke of his terror, of the promise he'd made to his father. A promise that had become a prison. Maya spoke of her own fear. Of the loneliness of being a caregiver to a man who refused to be cared for. Of the crushing weight of managing the secret. And I spoke of my grief. Of the feeling that the wall they'd built was not to protect me, but to exclude me from the most important fight of my son's life. There were more tears, but they were different now. They were the kind that washed things clean. The months that followed were a slow, deliberate lesson in rebuilding. The secret was gone, and in its place, we began to build a new kind of family. One forged in honesty instead of illusion. The wall between us came down, brick by painful brick. I started going with them to the appointments at the neurology clinic. The first time, we sat in that waiting room, the same appointment I'd discovered on the calendar, and it felt like a surrender. But it wasn't a surrender to the disease. It was a surrender to each other. I'd sit with Maya, and we'd talk quietly while David was with the doctor. No longer a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, but two women who loved the same man and were determined to see him through. My nursing background was no longer a source of suspicion, but a resource. I helped them navigate the labyrinth of insurance paperwork, translated the doctor's medical jargon, and researched clinical trials with a determination I hadn't felt since my residency. There were hard days. I came over one Saturday afternoon in early spring to find David sitting on his back porch, staring at the melting snow as it revealed the muddy, dormant lawn. His football whistle was on the table next to him, untouched. "The new season starts in a few months," he said without looking at me. "Dr. Evans says, we have to be realistic about my energy levels." He picked up the whistle, his fingers tracing its shape. "What if I can't coach anymore? Mom? What if I can't keep up with Leo? It's all I am." The old David would have said this to no one. He would have buried it deep inside. But the new David was looking at me, his vulnerability an open door. I sat down next to him, my hand finding his. "You are a husband, and a father, and my son," I said, my voice firm. "You are not a disease. And you are not what you do. You are who you are. We'll figure the rest out. Together." He squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement. It wasn't a solution, but it was enough. Which brings us to today. We're back in the waiting room at North Shore Neurology. The chairs are still uncomfortable. And the magazines are still 6 months out of date. It's a place of uncertainty, of waiting for news you may or may not want to hear. But today, it doesn't feel scary. It just feels like a place we have to be. I'm sitting between David and Maya. Leo is at my house with a sitter, probably eating all the oatmeal raisin cookies I baked this morning. Maya has a large binder on her lap. Every medical report and test result organized with a librarian's precision. David is quietly reading, but his knee is bouncing up and down with a nervous energy he can't quite hide. After a moment, he puts his book down and reaches out. His hand finds mine, his grip firm and warm. Then, he reaches for Maya's, and she threads her fingers through his. The three of us are linked. A small, quiet chain of strength. He's still carrying a burden. We all are, but he's not carrying it alone anymore. David Miller, the nurse calls out, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. We all stand up together. David takes a breath, straightens his shoulders, and looks at us, a small, determined smile on his face. We smile back. He is not a man walking toward a scary, unknown future by himself. He is a man walking toward his life, flanked by his family. And as we walk through that door together, I realize the truth. The heaviest things in our lives are not our sorrows or our fears. They are the secrets we carry. And the moment you put them down and let someone help you, they become so much lighter. You almost feel like you can fly. If this story about the secrets we keep and the strength we find in truth resonated with you, please hit that like button. It truly helps share these stories with others who might need to hear them. My favorite, most heartbreaking moment was when David finally confessed at the Thanksgiving table. What part of the story hit you the hardest? Let me know in the comments below. We all have burdens we carry, and sometimes just sharing them can make all the difference. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story.